There's a big difference between traveling and running away. I used to think I was doing the first, but looking back, I was probably always doing the second. My name is Sophia. For about 3 years, my life was what many on social media would call a dream. I was a travel blogger. It sounds glamorous, doesn't it? Getting paid to go to beautiful places, take perfect photos in a flowing dress, and post them online with some profound caption about finding yourself. But the truth isn't that romantic. The truth is the pressure to find the next Instagrammable spot, the reality of color correcting a sunset until it no longer resembles a real thing, the experience of jostling with hundreds of other people all trying to take the exact same photo at the exact same location. I was so tired of the fake paradises, the places that only look beautiful through a filter on a phone. I was craving something real, a place that hadn't appeared on any hashtag. That's why I came to the Algarve, the southern coast of Portugal, but I avoided the resorts and the famous tourist towns. Instead, I rented an old motorbike and drove along the lesser-known coastal roads, staying in small goose houses and spending my time in local bars where old fishermen and true, gritty backpackers gathered. It was in one of those bars, a place with sticky floors and the heavy smell of salt, that I heard it. It was a hushed conversation between two older men, maybe German or Dutch, with sun-weathered skin and faded tattoos. They were talking about a place called Praia do Silencio, the silent beach. They spoke with a reverence that was almost fear. Say it was the last truly wild place, a place that weeds out the weak on its own. My heart beat faster. This was it. This was what I was looking for. It took all my courage and 2 glasses of throat-burning Madronho before I dared approach them. At first, they were wary and ignored me, but perhaps they saw the genuine desperation in my eyes. One of them, the one with the white beard, drew something that wasn't quite a map onto a napkin for me. It was just a series of vague instructions. Go west from Sagres. Find a cliff that looks like a praying monk. Wait for the month's spring tide. When the tide is at its lowest, an entrance will appear, a sea cave. Swim through it. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, one last thing. Don't bring useless things. There's no reception there anyway. 2 days later, I was standing before the monk-shaped cliff. Everything was just as he'd said. I left almost all my belongings with a motorbike, hidden behind a bush, taking only a small waterproof backpack with some food, water, and a multi-tool knife. I waited for hours. Finally, as the sun began to set, the tide receded to reveal a dark mouth of a cave at the base of the cliff. Seawater was still pouring out of it. My heart was racing, a mixture of terror and pure exhilaration. This was a threshold. I took a deep breath, plunged into the darkness, and swam with the current. The cave was longer than I thought and completely black. I could only swim by feel and hope that there was light on the other side. And then I saw it, an arc of turquoise light ahead. I swam towards it with all my strength, and when I surfaced, I had to catch my breath. I had arrived. It was more beautiful than any photo I had ever edited. A perfect crescent-shaped cove, enclosed by towering limestone cliffs, shielding it completely from the outside world. The sand was white and fine as flour. The seawater was a brilliant, clear turquoise. There were no other footprints but the ones I was about to make. Not a single piece of trash. Only the gentle lapping of the waves and the sound of the wind sighing over the cliff tops. After a moment, I noticed a few signs of life. Tucked at the base of the cliff were 3 or 4 makeshift shelters, built from driftwood, old fishing nets, and tarps. A thin plume of smoke was rising from a small fire. I wasn't alone, and that, at that moment, was a relief. I had found it, not just a secret beach, but a secret community. People like me, people who were fed up with the world outside. I took my first steps onto the soft sand, felt the warm sun on my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had truly come home. As I walked toward the fire, a few people looked up. There was no suspicion or hostility in their eyes, just a calm curiosity. A man with a golden beard and long hair tied back in a knot smiled and waved me over. In his 30s. He looked like a Viking god who had just stepped out of myth. Welcome, he said, in English with a thick Scandinavian accent. We were wondering if anyone else would arrive before the next full moon. I'm Lars. His warm welcome immediately chased away any lingering anxiety I had. I introduced myself as Sophia and briefly explained how I'd heard about this place. The others introduced themselves one by one. There was Anya, a Polish girl with dreamy eyes, Marco and Eva, a chatty and cheerful Italian couple, and a few others, a small community of about 7 or 8 people from all over Europe. They shared their freshly grilled fish and some sweet potatoes that had been baked in the hot ashes. We sat around the fire, and I felt an immediate connection, an unspoken understanding between people who had given up on the world out there. They didn't ask me about my job, my past, or anything belonging to my old life. Here, it seemed only the present mattered. As the sun finally set behind the cliffs, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, I witnessed the first strange thing. It wasn't scary. It was even sort of beautiful at the time, but it was a seed for everything that came later. Lars, who seemed to be the group's unofficial leader, stood up. He said nothing, just walked silently to the water's edge, where the white crested waves were gently licking the sand. He was holding something small in his hand. I squinted and saw it was a small effigy, skillfully but crudely woven from pieces of driftwood and a few strands of seaweed, tied together with twine. It looked like both a child's toy and a ritualistic object from some ancient rite. Lars bent down and placed the effigy on the wet sand, right where the next wave would reach it. He stood there for a moment, his head slightly bowed, as if saying a silent farewell. Then a small wave rolled in, and when it receded, the effigy was gone. Lars returned to fire and sat down, his expression perfectly calm, as if he had just performed the most ordinary of daily chores. My curiosity got the better of me. What was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Anya, who was sitting next to me, smiled. It was a gentle smile, but there was something distant in it. It's a gift, she said. A thank you to the beach for letting us stay here, for keeping us safe. A thank you? I thought. It sounded a bit strange, like a hippie custom, but also lovely, in a place as beautiful and pristine. Showing gratitude to nature was perfectly understandable. It was 100 times more authentic than checking in at a tourist spot and writing some hollow caption. I nodded, pretending to understand completely. That's a nice idea. That night, lying in my sleeping bag under a natural rock shelter they'd shown me, I felt a sense of absolute peace. The steady rhythm of the waves was like a universal lullaby. I could see millions of stars glittering in the sky, unpolluted by city lights. Everything was perfect. I thought about the little driftwood effigy, a gift for the beach. I decided that in the morning, I would make one myself. It would be my way of officially becoming a part of this place, of showing that I treasured the secret just as much as they did. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, completely unaware that I had just cheerfully accepted the first rule of an invisible prison. My first morning in the Silent Cove, I woke up in a state of pure contentment. I spent the morning walking along the water's edge, collecting the most beautifully shaped pieces of driftwood and the freshest strands of seaweed. I sat on the warm sand, mimicking from memory to create my own little effigy. It wasn't as skillful as the one Lars had made, but I put all my heart into it. At midday, I solemnly carried my gift to the water's edge, placed it down, and watched the wave carry it away. Anya and Eva saw me do it, and they smiled, a smile of approval. I was a part of them now. The feeling of belonging somewhere, something I hadn't had in a very long time, was sweet. The next few days passed like a dream. Life here was simple to the point of being primitive. We swam in the clear water, sunbathed on the warm rocks, and spent the evenings telling stories around the fire. There were no phones, no emails, no pressure to create content, only existence. I had found exactly what I had been craving, a raw, unfiltered truth. However, after about a week, small details began to demand my attention, like grains of sand in a dish that was supposed to be perfect. The first thing I noticed was their relationship with the tide. They were obsessively aware of it. They knew exactly when the tide would recede to its lowest point, revealing the entrance to the cave. But at those times, a strange silence would fall over the group. No one went near the cave. They seemed to deliberately avoid it, gathering on the opposite side of the beach. One afternoon, I casually mentioned that I wanted to swim back to the mainland for a bit to get a book I had left in my motorbike's saddlebag. The whole group suddenly went quiet. Lars turned to me, his smile still in place, but his eyes were not. "Why would you want to leave?" he asked, his voice soft. "Everything you need is here." His words, so gentle, sent a chill down my spine. It didn't feel like a question. It felt like a warning. At the time, I reassured myself that they were just trying to protect the secrecy of this place. They didn't want to be careless and lead others here. That possessiveness, though a bit extreme, was understandable. But then other strange things continued to appear. I started to notice a certain emptiness in this community. Anya's dreamy eyes, which I had initially found so romantic, now seemed more like a vacant stare. The laughter of the Italian couple, Marco and Eva, would sometimes cut off abruptly, as if they had forgotten what they were laughing about. Our conversations never went further than immediate topics: the weather, the fish, the firewood. No one spoke of the future, no one mentioned the past. It was as if they were living in an endless loop of the present. The ritual of gifting to the beach also became more frequent, not just at sunset. I saw Eva secretly place an effigy into water at midday, right after she and Marco had a small argument. I saw a Swedish man named Eric, the quietest of the group, do the same one morning at dawn. It seemed they did it not just to give thanks, but to appease something. And at night, sometimes I heard them, a low, monotonous chanting coming from the water's edge. It wasn't a song, just a repetition of a few strange-sounding words I couldn't understand. I tried to convince myself it was just their form of meditation. I was the outsider, the only normal one who found it strange. My self-reassurance shattered completely on the 10th day. That was the day paradise began to bleed. Marco, while fishing on the slippery rocks, had fallen. He came back with a deep, long gash on his calf, bleeding profusely. The wound looked terrible. I'm no doctor, but I knew for certain it needed stitches and antibiotics if he was to avoid infection. I panicked. "We have to get him out of here," I said loudly. "We have to wait for low tide and get him to a hospital." The reaction of the others left me speechless. There was no panic, no urgency, just a terrifying calm. Lars approached, looking at the wound with a detached air. "The beach will provide," he said. Anya began to crush some kind of seaweed to make a poultice. Eva, Marco's partner, was crying, but they were quiet, resigned tears, not desperate ones. Not a single one of them made any move to prepare for departure. "What are you talking about?" I nearly shouted at Lars. "He could die from that infection. We have to go." Lars turned to look at me, and this time there wasn't a trace of warmth left in his eyes, only a cold, empty void. "We don't leave," he said, his voice flat and clear. "Leaving is an insult. The beach gives us what we need, and it takes what it must." The cruelty of that statement, disguised as some sick spiritual belief, horrified me. They were willing to let their friend die, just so they wouldn't insult a patch of sand and some waves. This paradise wasn't a free community. It was a cult that worshipped its own prison. And I realized a terrifying truth. I had to escape. I didn't say another word. I pretended to accept their decision. But in my mind, a frantic plan was forming. I knew the tide would be at its lowest around 3 in the morning. I had to act then. All evening, I secretly packed my waterproof bag. Marco began to run a fever, moaning in their makeshift tent, while Eva just sat beside him, humming those meaningless chants. The atmosphere in the group was now suffocating. When everyone was asleep, I slowly crept from my spot. The moon was hidden by clouds tonight. The darkness was my ally. I ran as fast as I could, barefoot on the sand, towards a cave. But as I got near, my heart stopped. The entrance was gone. A massive pile of driftwood and giant boulders blocked the mouth of the cave, stacked upon each other in a deliberate way. It would have taken several people hours of work to create such a barrier. It couldn't have appeared naturally. They knew. They had known I would try to escape. I turned around, a feeling of defeat and despair washing over me. From the distance, near the fire, I saw the entire group standing there. They weren't asleep. They were just standing silently in the dark silhouettes watching me. They didn't chase me. They didn't shout. Their silence was more terrifying than any threat. The wind carried Lars's calm voice to my ears. "The beach doesn't want you to go, Sophia." From that night on, everything changed. The superficial friendliness was gone, replaced by an unspoken but suffocating surveillance. They still spoke to me, but their eyes followed my every move. Marco grew weaker each day, his fever never breaking, and I could feel my own mind starting to tear. The sound of the waves was no longer a lullaby. It sounded like mocking whispers. I looked up at the towering cliffs around me. They were no longer majestic protectors. They were prison walls. My dream had become my own cage, and there was no way out. The days that followed were submerged in a heavy silence, a state of waiting. Marco faded in his tent, and the entire beach seemed to be holding its breath with him. There were no more stories around the fire, no more laughter, only the sound of Eva's chanting, a monotonous, soulless sound that stretched from day into night. I had become a ghost among them. They didn't speak to me, but I could always feel their eyes on my back, a wordless surveillance that felt more suffocating than the stone walls. I spent hours staring at the cliffs, searching desperately for a crack, a ledge, a possible way to climb. But all I saw were sheer rock faces, slick with salt spray. The only exit was blocked, and now my own mind was becoming a prison. On the 5th day after my failed escape, Marco died. He passed away quietly at dawn, when the fever had finally burned away the last of his life. I had expected an explosion of grief from Eva, a heart-wrenching wail. But no, she just silently closed her husband's eyes, her face a mask devoid of all emotion. That silence was more terrifying than any scream. And then the ritual began. Lars and Eric entered the tent and brought Marco's body out, now wrapped in an old sailcloth. They laid him on the sand. The whole group gathered, forming a silent circle around the body. I watched from a distance, a cold dread beginning to creep into my heart. I thought they would carry him out to sea, some kind of burial at sea, but they didn't walk towards the waves. They carried the body toward the cave, towards a wall of stone and driftwood that had blocked my escape. They placed Marco down right in front of the barricade. Lars began to chant, the strange, ancient words echoing in the still morning air. The others joined them, creating a steady, eerie drone that bounced off the cliffs. As they chanted, I noticed something I had missed before, tucked into crevices of the rockfall, and in the cracks of the cliff face around the cave were hundreds of the little effigies, the thank you gifts to the beach. They weren't washed away at all. They were brought here. They were like offerings, tiny gravestones marking something. And then they did something that shattered my reality into pieces. Lars and Eric didn't try to move the rocks to take Marco out to sea. They lifted his rigid body and began to wedge it into a large gap in the barricade. They used his body like another stone, another log, to fill the space. They worked methodically, without hesitation, while the others continued to chant. In that horrifying moment, I understood everything. That wall wasn't just built of stone and wood. It was built of bodies. The bodies of those who tried to leave, or those the beach had taken. Those effigies weren't thank you gifts. They were memorials, or perhaps offerings, for the souls that had been used to build the prison itself. This community didn't just accept death. They were actively participating in construction and reinforcement of their own cage, with the corpses of their friends. I would be next. Sooner or later, I would become another stone in that wall. A scream died in my throat. That single thought broke every chain of fear. I would not die here. I would not become part of that grotesque wall. No more plans. No more calculations. Only instinct. I didn't run towards the cave. I turned and ran for the cliffs, the most dangerous place, but also the only glimmer of hope. I didn't choose the easiest path. I chose a treacherous-looking fissure that had many small, jutting ledges. I began to climb. My hands grabbed at sharp edges, bleeding. Loose rock crumbled and fell beneath my feet. Every reach upwards was a gamble with my life. I didn't dare look down. I just knew I had to climb, inch by inch, using every last ounce of strength and will I had left. Below me, the chanting continued, steady and eerie, the soundtrack to my desperate escape. It was no longer the sound of human voices. It was the voice of the Silent Cove itself, and it was saying I would never get away. I don't know where that strength came from. Perhaps it was the most primal survival instinct, something buried deep beneath the civilized person I used to be. Blood flowed from my fingers, mixing with sweat and tears, but I felt no pain. I only felt the sharp rocks biting into my flesh, and that was the only thing that proved I was still alive. Every time I pulled my body up another few inches, I heard loose rocks skittering down below, a constant reminder of the death that was waiting. The chanting continued to rise from the beach, a ghostly, invisible tether that seemed to be trying to pull me back down. But now, it no longer frightened me. It filled me with rage, a burning rage that fueled me. I don't know how long it was, maybe hours, before I reached a relatively flat ledge. I was exhausted, collapsing onto it, gasping for air like an animal. Once I had regained some strength, I carefully crawled to the edge and looked down. From this height, the beach looked strangely small. The ritual was over. The group was no longer near the cave. They were standing in a straight line at the water's edge, their backs to the cliffs, staring out at the ocean. They weren't looking for me. They weren't chasing me. They had simply resumed their routine, as if I had never existed. And that indifference, somehow, was the most horrifying thing of all. In their eyes, I was already dead. No one could climb these cliffs. No one could leave the Silent Cove. But I had. After resting, I discovered a narrow path, probably a trail made by mountain goats, that ran along the cliff top. I followed it, an endless journey through thorny bushes and dangerous slopes. Finally, as sunset approached, I found a way down on the other side, far from the cursed beach. I was back in the world of footpaths and trails. Some drivers found me the next morning, unconscious on the side of the road. They said I was severely dehydrated, exhausted, and in shock. I tried to tell the police everything. I told them about the isolated community, about Marco, about the wall built of bodies. They listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They sent a helicopter to fly along the coast. They said they found no beach matching my description, no sign of any campsite. Perhaps I had been hallucinating from sunstroke and exhaustion, they suggested. They filed a missing person report for an Italian tourist named Marco Rossi, but with no leads, the case was quietly forgotten. I never went back to my old life. I deleted the blog, deleted the social media accounts. The idea of a hidden paradise now makes me physically sick. How can I praise the beauty of a deserted beach when I know that its emptiness could be a prison, and its silence could be hiding screams that are never heard? I returned to Paris, burying myself in the noise and anonymity of a big city. I need the traffic, the voices, the sounds of life to drown out the sound of the waves in my head. But the haunting never really goes away. It just changes shape. I'm now afraid of overly friendly communities. I'm afraid of groups that share a secret, of smiles that are too perfect. I'm afraid of places that are too quiet. Whenever I see a group of friends traveling together, looking happy and free, a part of me wonders, are all of them really happy to be there? Or is one of them desperately trying to get out? Sometimes, late at night, I sit alone in my apartment, looking out at the city lights. On my bookshelf are a few souvenirs of my old travels, a shell from Thailand, a volcanic rock from Iceland, and there's a small piece of driftwood I picked up on some beach in Greece a long time ago. Last night, in a moment of distraction, I picked it up. My hands unconsciously found a piece of twine on my desk and began to wrap it around the wood. I twisted the dried decorative seaweed. I keep in a vase around it, creating a familiar shape. It was only when I was nearly finished that I flinched, realizing what I was doing. I was making an effigy. I threw it in the bin immediately, my hands trembling. I had escaped that beach, but maybe a part of it had followed me. It's no longer in the cliffs or the waves. It's right here in my head. And I wonder, am I truly free? Or have I just traded a physical prison for another, one where the walls are built for my own memories, and where I will have to spend the rest of my life making gifts for it to appease it, so that it doesn't swallow me completely?